Hello friends, and welcome to my second train simulator route creation tutorial. This is Old Dad again from the mountains of East Tennessee. This edition will be more about the route editor menus. I'm going to cover what each of the buttons and apps in the route editor do and talk about some things to be careful of when editing. Here we see a train in Cowan, Tennessee on the route that I have been creating in Train Simulator. The train is headed up a 2% grade to the Cumberland Mountain Tunnel. Here's a photograph of what the actual railroad grade looks like. This line is the former Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis, Louisville and Nashville CSX transportation line from Nashville to Chattanooga. And also I'm modeling the Tracy City branch line, which is the track that I happen to be standing on that heads up the mountain parallel to the main line. The main thing when you're creating a route is that you want to have some fun, and hopefully here in my tutorials you're going to find some useful information to help you get started. So when you decide on a route that you would like to create, you need to find as much information as you can about the route. As I told you in my last tutorial, which I hope you watched and gave me a like, I created my route using Google Earth Overlay and real railroad profile charts. I am lucky to have been able to access those charts for the railroad I'm modeling. You will have to research and find out if any charts are available for your own chosen route that you want to create. You can find them sometimes at railroad historical societies. For example, the Louisville and Nashville Historical Society had the profile charts that I needed. Some are also for sale on eBay and other railfan sites. You can also search property maps with state and local tax assessor offices. In Tennessee, these are actually online and can be downloaded. Another great resource is the U.S. Geological Survey maps, and the government has USGS maps available from all over the country in their map store. You can find that online. Now, these maps can be saved as a PDF which you download for your computer, or you can download a KMZ file that will open up in Google Earth, and I'll show you how to do that. It goes without saying you need Google Earth downloaded on your computer too. Another great resource is to find historic aerials for the area that you are modeling. These can be overlaid in Google Earth also, just like the USGS maps. And these can be obtained from the USGS store for download as a TIFF file, which is a photographic file. I'll get more into detail about all of these items as we go along. So everybody hang in there with me, and let's have some fun. So now I want to show you some of the things that we'll use in creating our route. We'll escape out of the Tracy City branch here, and we'll take a look at a profile chart. This is an official Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railway profile chart issued about 1916 for the railroad. And there's a lot of useful information in here. Gradients, curvature, other things like structures like a bridge or a tunnel or a water tank are all going to be shown on these profile charts. And as you go through and you look, each town is listed, and the sidings, spur tracks, depot, freight depot, lots of different things are listed on these charts. Lots of railroads use the same or very similar style profile charts. Hopefully you can find something for the route that you would like to create. So that's one of the resources. Now let me show you another. This is a tax map. It is from the Assessor's Office of the state of Tennessee, which, as I said earlier, you can search in Tennessee on Tennessee Railroad maps, do a Google search, and you will find the Comptroller's website where you can download these maps. Now, these maps have been used by the state tax assessors to keep up with the railroad rights of way, and they date way on back into the teens typically, I found, for the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railway. And they show who some of the adjacent property owners were, as well as the assets of the railroad in a particular location. Now in this particular case, and this is a PDF that I'm going to enlarge so we can see some of the detail. In my previous video I mentioned the section houses. Here the section houses are that are shown next to the railroad track. That section house is where the track repair people actually live beside the tracks. And the railroad provided them with housing. Now these maps, besides showing where the line where the tracks actually passed through the area, along with the width of the right-of-way for the railroad and adjacent landowners, which are mentioned here. In this case, here's a landowner that was Tennessee Consolidated Coal Company that was adjacent to it. But it shows the mileposts, and it shows the curvature. So here we have a 3-degree and 30-minute curve. That's the radius of this curve. That's some very helpful information that we can use in creating our route, so that we get the route accurate and in the location it should be. Another important aspect of these profile charts is the chain marks. Here you see a series of numbers. Let's take this milepost for instance. It has a chain number of 1942 plus 36. Well, a chain in the terminology of the surveyor is 100 feet. And so that would be 1,942 chains, or 1942 times 100. So then you add the additional 36, which is just simply 36 feet. So we have 194,236 feet from the beginning of the railroad at milepost 0, or whatever starting point that they used. But each of these chains, then you see here's a concrete pipe under the railroad. It gives the chain dimension for that. You move along, it will tell you where there's a public road. There's the chain dimension for that. So that's where all the dimensions come in for measuring the actual railroad and how far it is between the mileposts. You can find out if you have a long mile or a short mile by a few feet one way or the other. As I've moved the profile chart around, we see we're in the downtown of Palmer, which is the area that I was talking about in my first video. You can see that the main track passed through the town. There was a siding, and there was also a Y. Now all this sold and other large black marks, which kind of really ruined the profile chart, but all this notation and everything on here was done by the assessors of the state of Tennessee, who have been making notes as things changed over the years. Lots of detail can be found on these profile charts. Here at 200,635 chains is the water tank for the steam locomotives. There's another map that passes on beyond this point, and there's a match mark on here, which is the beginning of the next map. You can see some spur tracks or sidings taking off here, which is the beginning of the large mining facility that was in Palmer. So you can see there's a lot of helpful information there. Other things that you can use are photographs. You start looking at a particular area and trying to find as much information as you can. This is one of the mines that was in Palmer. There's a lot of detail that can be obtained from looking at the photographs. How many tracks actually went under the tipple, various things like that. So you get ideas of what the structure would need to look like. You know, that would be a massive undertaking to create a mine such as that in Train Simulator. But there are folks who specialize in that. So maybe I'll find me somebody who build me a mine for my railroad. I enjoy the track laying aspects of it, and I'm sure when I learn how to use the 3D software that I will enjoy creating a mine for my railroad. So photographs are important. This is a company magazine for the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railway. It shows the yard at Tracy City. Again, it's given me information I need to know about how the track layout was. And in this particular case, the employee magazine called the NC St. L Railway Bulletin was doing an article on the Tracy City branch. So I have lots of other items that I found in the article. Two of the coal loadouts along the line. This one was at Collins, Tennessee. This one was at Colmont, Tennessee. So I now have some idea. This is a truck dump. I now have some idea of what these look like, which is, it's just great. You need this information to make your railroad look like the real one did. Here's another shot of a coal mine at Palmer. Notice the different grades of coal. This was fine, and then run of mine, which is all different sizes, and then lump coal over here, and there's probably a stoker run, but you see there are 1, 2, 3, 4 tracks under that tipple in this photograph for the different grades of coal. As the coal plant screened the coal, it moved into bins for the various sizes, and then they were loaded in the hopper cars. Here's a photograph of downtown Palmer in 1965. You can see the railroad tracks. The train station is in this area marked by number 1, and the rest of the town is there. The post office. This is the old movie house, and this is a building that was the the mine commissary building. It was located right here, and a gas station. So you look for all these things wherever you can find them, and search the internet, search books, search libraries for any kind of information you can find about the area that you want to build, and you will find lots of good information. Okay, let's open up Train Simulator and get started looking at what we're going to do to create us a tutorial route. We're waiting on the splash screen to come up. There it comes as the program loads. We're going to click on Build, Route, and we're going to go down here and we're going to create a new route. Now, what you have to do when you're going to create a new route, you have to assign it a name, and you have to use a starting point that is a latitude and longitude. In this particular case, I'm going to call my route for this tutorial Chattanooga. And we're going to choose a ground texture. In this particular case, I'm going to choose the Norfolk Southern Coal District. Now notice, when I'm selecting the ground texture, it gave me a latitude and longitude. Now that is the latitude and longitude for the Norfolk Southern Coal District. I have to change that to a latitude and longitude where I want it to start in my tutorial route. So we're going to open up Google Earth, and I'm going to show you how to find the latitude and longitude in Google Earth. Okay, so let's open up Google Earth, and Google Earth is a wonderful program. If you don't have it loaded on your computer, as I've said, you're going to need to get that in order to use it as a great research tool for doing your train simulator route. So we're going to look here, and in Google Earth you type in a search. I'm going to type Chattanooga, which is in Tennessee, and good old Google Earth is going to take us right there. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with Chattanooga, Chattanooga is located on the Tennessee River. It was a point in its creation where it was where the flatboats and later on river boats, paddle wheelers, I guess, transloaded shipments. It was a port city in the state of Tennessee, I guess you could say, and then later a railroad, extremely important railroad town. So as we look at Chattanooga, we see the Tennessee River winding its way through the town, and then right here is Lookout Mountain, a very prominent feature of the topography of Chattanooga. Now right here at the base of the mountain is some unique railroad features. This area was Craven's Yard of the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railway. And Craven's Yard was a fairly decent sized yard for the NC and St. L, and it was later replaced by another yard here in town called Wauhatchie, which is over here. And one of the reasons it got replaced is that they needed a larger, more efficient yard, but they also wanted to build Interstate 24 around on some of the property. So in 1961, this yard was largely closed except for a few local tracks that we'll call them here, and then they began construction of the interstate, and the new yard was also completed in 1961. So when you go here and you look, there are two railroads that are associated with the front of Lookout Mountain. The current CSX railroad still runs right along the base of the mountain here and traverses over here into the yard. The other railroad is the Norfolk Southern, former Southern Railway, and that comes and passes into a tunnel through the base of Lookout Mountain and emerges over here on this side, on the railroad north side, I guess you would call it, and continues on into Chattanooga. So both railroads entered the city in the front of Lookout Mountain. Before the tunnel was built in 1909, all the trains entering Chattanooga from the west and southwest entered around the front of the mountain. They shared the tracks. It got to be there were too many trains and too busy, so the Southern Railway at the time constructed their own line into Chattanooga, constructing the tunnel. Probably more history than you want for our purposes right here, but anyway, I'm going to pick a starting point right here on the main line of the CSX, former Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis, former Louisville and Nashville line, and I'm just going to pick this spot right here. And I'm going to write down this number. As you can see right here, there's a dot right there. I'm going to pick that as our spot, and we'll see how that works out. But down here at the bottom of Google Earth, you can see there is, right here next to the words Google Earth, you can see there's a latitude and longitude information. And the more I move my mouse around, that's constantly changing. Notice that we also have the elevation. So if I come over here, we find that we are at approximately 35.019 and minus 85.327 as a location. And then our elevation is approximately 669 feet. Now that's a very good approximation, but I found that Google Earth is not always perfect, in particular when you start getting around objects that might not be completely transferring correctly from the data files. Like you get to the base of a mountain, sometimes you get some pretty funky changes in elevation. Like here we're at 671 feet. Let's look at this road up here. That's 807 feet. That's fairly accurate as far as that this is substantially higher if we were looking at this in real life and looking at the various elevations from the interstate to the railroad to the highway. There is a dramatic change in elevation between here and here. So you can see everywhere you move your hand, you get a different measurement. This is obviously a bridge. Google Earth is funny. I'm going to tick the 3D buildings just for a second, because Chattanooga is one of the places that has been digitized by Google Earth to give you 3D images. In fact, Chattanooga was one of the first, if not the first, location. And you notice when you tick 3D, the bridge is there. I'm going to untick 3D, and you'll see it falls back down in the creek. But that's the nature of a flat world and the technology. So I've got these dimensions here. I'm going to write that down. I've got it written down. I'm going to minimize Google Earth for the time being. And we're going to come over here and we're going to enter, I'm going to replace that factory latitude and longitude from the Norfolk Southern Coal District with my own 35.019337. I don't know how many digits it'll carry out there, but we'll see. And then we have minus 85.327758. Okay, now I have the real world Chattanooga latitude and longitude that I want to start my route. And I don't know how close it will be, but we'll find out when we get it into the program. Again, I've selected Norfolk Southern Coal District as my ground texture set. Now I'm going to click the Create button. And we see that here in the list, populated is Chattanooga. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Chattanooga and I'm going to click Edit. And we're going to watch and wait as Google Earth, oh, there's a nice new splash screen. I'm going to watch as Google Earth and wait as Google Earth creates it. Boom, there we are. There's the tile telling us that we're in the world. And if I look up here, I see in this box, which is your navigator, it gives you the direction that you're looking. It also gives you your latitude and longitude. And as you work around in Google Earth, what you will find is that changes. See, I'm changing numbers here as I move around. Okay? So I can enter, now that I'm in the editing program, if I wanted to jump to another point in my route, I could actually enter the latitude and longitude and click this button right here, the Go button, and it will take me to that location. So I'm not going to do that for the moment. I'm going to stay right here where I'm at. Now what I want to do is, you notice that where we're at, it's just a flat world. Everything around me is flat. And if you don't do anything else, you'll be creating your route in a flat world. And what you have to do is, and I have already done this, you have to get the terrain data imported in to your computer, and I'm going to post a video on how you go about doing that. I'm going to post a link to a tutorial, I should say. And it's the one that I use to import my data, and I don't want to go into the boring details of how that gets done, because you do it one time for the area that you're going to build your route, and then it's done. Since I already have it in the computer here, what I'm going to do shortly is I'm going to show you what the terrain looks like. But we're going to work here for a while with just some tools and take a look at what things look like when we work in this world. So here we are. There's my starting point that I asked for. I'm going to pull back, and we're going to hit Control G and open up Google Earth, and we're going to see how close we were to our spot. Now let's open up the Google. This is the Google Earth controls over here. I'm going to pin it out. This little pin either holds the fly out menu in place constantly, or if you untick it, it lets it go back. So you just hover over here near the corner and it pops out. I'm going to pin it so it'll stay there, but let's darken this up just a little bit. Look at that. The train simulator program and Google Earth are very well linked, wouldn't you say? Because there's my little white spot on the ground, okay, in Google Earth, and look where my route is starting. It's right here in the middle of this. So we now have our starting point. You could say, wow, I could start laying some track and we can go to town. Well, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to lay some track and we're going to look around and show you how some of these tools work for what we're going to do. All right. And I'm going to try and show you some tricks that I found about laying track that, for me, it makes it a little easier. Okay. I'm going to untick Google Earth. I'm going to turn Google Earth off again by clicking Control G. And I'm going to untick all the boxes here until we go around and we talk about some of these tools. I'm not going to untick that one. I'm going to leave the route or the navigator, the compass and everything there at the same time also. So what I want to do, I don't want to lose my spot. Let's talk about some of these buttons. This is a Toolbox flyout menu. Each of these headings up here takes you to a different group of tools. This one takes you to object tools. Well, what are the objects? Here's the object flyout menu. Objects are structures, factories, scenery items, foliage and water, stations, people, track infrastructure, clutter, tunnels, bridges, and viaducts, sounds, and odds and ends in this grab bag here. So if we take a look at, just for example, house structures. Now what you see here are the objects that are in the Penn Coal or Norfolk Southern Coal route. And that's what I have here, are some of the structure objects that are in that. Let's take, for instance, this is an apartment. Notice it's hovering right here on the ground, right at ground level. So that's how you would take a structure and adjust it and find the right place for it to be if I was going to put that structure in. And then it'll allow me to put another one down, but I'm going to right click and make that disappear. Now you see I can come back and move this structure around. I'm doing that with the mouse. And I want to do something else. Right down here in this box of tools is a little TS14. Here you see a little X and Y control. I can make it disappear under the ground. I can make it come above the ground. Depends on what the scenery terrain. Here's my tool for moving in different directions. I like to use this version, which you see creates this little world object, which lets me do some things like tilt, and rotate. Oops, hit the green bar there. I can rotate, or I can do the X and Y alignment that way. Now, which leads me to the next button that I want to tell you about, which is the undo button. One of the most important buttons that you will ever use in Train Simulator is the undo and the redo. If you notice, if I start undoing, it has a selected memory of things that I can undo inside there, and eventually it will run out, or it'll reach the point where that object disappears from the world. So that's the way you put an object in the world. I know that has nothing to do with the track, but I just wanted to show that because it is the structure. All right, the next object here in the line of tools across the top in the toolbox is the linear objects tool. Now, this takes a little getting used to, and as you will see in just a moment what I'm talking about, but it's not just track. You see here are the types of track that are available in this flyout menu from the Penn Coal, Norfolk Southern Coal District route. Different kinds of track. Also there are things like scenery items like chain link fence, concrete barrier, bridges, and all of these things are placed in a linear fashion. Let me give you for example. We use the linear tool. When you click on an object here, the linear arrow is going to appear. I'm going to use PC main track yard. Now there is the arrow tool that I was telling you about. Notice that as I move my mouse around, it follows me around. If I want to position it somewhere, let's say this is where my track is going to start, I'll set it here on the ground. I'll left click on it, and now it's pinned to the ground. And as I pull away from it with the mouse, you'll see that I have some lines that have appeared. That is where a piece of track is going to appear when I actually click it again. Now I'm going to click it again and you'll see a piece of track. And you see it's a curve that I created. Radius sort of unknown because I haven't done any calculations on any of that. I just sort of did it. And you'll notice that if I keep going, it's still connected and it just keeps going and going and going as long as I want it to. I'm going to stop, I'm going to right click, and look, my little arrow is back. Now I'm going to right click again and the arrow will disappear. I'm going to hit the undo button and bring the track back to reality here. I just wanted to show you how that works with a piece of track. Now let's look at something else. Let's pick chain link fence. Same arrow tool, except now when I put this down, I'm going to be creating a chain link fence. And it's a linear. As long as I keep dragging it out, it will continue. You notice it's still connected here. I can turn it, make it follow a property line or a railroad if I want to put a chain link fence in. Now I right click again. There's my arrow back. Right click one more time and it's gone. I'll hit undo, undo, and take that out of the picture. So that's sort of how you use the linear tool. We're going to learn more as we go along. There's lots and lots of things here that are linear. How about we put down some road? Here's a 2-lane road version 2 with traffic. Traffic means that it will have automobiles actually appear and operate in the route when you're actually running some trains. So there's a road. We just laid down a little section of road. Now notice I right clicked and took it loose. You come back, bump it up against it, and you see how it's sort of magnetized almost. It pulls it right back. Now you know you're actually connected to the piece that you just laid, and you start again, and I can put a turn in that road. You see? Right click and there I am. I could take this and come to the other end of it and do this a similar thing. Click. Click. And that road is contiguous. It's all one piece of road. Now I'm going to right click, get rid of my linear tool, and I'm asking it to undo and it will not do it. I don't know why that is. Sometimes it's a little funky. But here's what we're going to do. You see there, I just highlighted that as I roll my mouse over the top of the cursor. I'm going to click on that, and now it turns red. I can hit the delete key on my keyboard and make that go away. So that's a little trick. Learning to do all this takes practice. Describing it to you, I may be using a lot of words. It's a little more difficult to describe sometimes than it is to actually do. So, that's the track and linear objects. The next thing that we have here are the painting tools. And those painting tools, there's a bunch of them that I'll eventually get and tell you what each one of these things does. But just to give you an example, the painting tools, and I'm going to make another menu fly out here. The painting tools are what you use to change the actual scenery, landscape, texture, shape, and there's all sorts of things you can do with these. And there are some other really good tutorials out there. I'm going to briefly show you what some of these will do. This is terrain up. Now this becomes important down here because this tells you the brush size, how large of an area I'm going to do. Here's your for instance. We're going to go down to 10, and this is terrain up. See? Increase height. So if I then change this to 10, this other area is the brush fall off, and this is the speed in which it happens. So if I click on this area, watch the terrain. It begins to rise. Okay? Now I'm going to increase the size of this to 25. Click the same spot and then watch the terrain. A much larger area of terrain begins to rise. I'm going to click down here and change this to 55. A much larger area, and so forth, all the way through. Undo, undo, undo. We're back where we were. Similarly, if we want a depression, you can see the scenery going down. You're decreasing the height of the scenery. And the more you hold it, the deeper it gets. The brush size determines the area that you're going to do. I'm going to undo that. We're back where we were. So that gives you a general idea of what's going on with the tools. There's another tool here I want to tell you about right away, which is the paint terrain. When you're putting scenery objects down and you want it to have the appearance of anything in particular that you see in this list, let's say we want to have forest bed number 2, forest floor number 2. I have a brush size now of 55, and when I click this, you see I've got a very large area, and I'm changing the patina of the landscape. Now I'm going to change the brush size down to a smaller brush, 15. See, I'm just doing a small area now. You can go down. I've gone down as small as 7.5 if I'm doing a area where I'm trying to get a fine change. Okay. Okay. More detail on those coming as we talk about scenery. The next thing is the scenario tools. I'm not going to click on that because it takes you to the point where you're going to create a scenario, and we don't have a route yet in here to create a scenario in. So we've got to actually lay some track before we can create a scenario. So that's what the 4 main categories are on the top here. And each time you click on a category, note that it changes in this flyout menu something related to the subject, which in this case happens to be objects. And there's lots of different things in here, too many to go into at one time, but lots of useful stuff in here. This set of menus begins to change the list from just a general everything down to something specific, like in this case factories and commercial buildings, houses, as we talked about, I'll look over here at signals, and we've got markers and level crossings, which is a railroad crossing, the types of signals that are in a particular route. So you're going to learn to navigate through all this stuff. This little yellow tail that's coming on, if I had a track here, I would attach that to the track, and that then ties this signal to that piece of railroad track. Since I don't have that, any track laid, I cannot put a signal down there. Yeah, you've got lots and lots of options that you will learn to use in all of these flyout menus. So one of the things that we're going to check when we're going to do track, which is what we're getting ready, I'm going to show you, we're going to lay some track using Google Maps. One of the things that you need to check is this bottom flyout menu here, which is your track rule. See the track rule. Track rules, and there are better explanations than I'm going to give you here, have to do with, for instance, if we were in the Northeast Corridor and we wanted an electrification line over the track so that an electric locomotive could operate, that would be in the track rule for that particular route. In this case, it's just pretty much strictly a diesel route, so or steam, if you go back far enough. I don't have to worry about that type of track rule. But in this case, because I imported the Norfolk Southern Coal District, I have the Penn Coal track rule. Then the rest of these items down here are critical for the alignment, curvature, and grade of all the tracks. We look here. This tool is used when you want to lay more than one track. This tool, this is a radio button. If I click that, I'm using easements. We'll get into easements a little later on. This particular tool is follow network. I'll explain that momentarily. This is the gradient tool. This actually sets the percentage of grade. In this particular case, since our world is flat, we really just need 0.0 for our tutorial route here to start with. This is snap to terrain, and this is snap to track. And I'm going to untick that radio button. And this is manual junctions. If I want all of my turnouts or switches to be manual, I tick this box, this radio button. If I want them to be automatic, I untick it. So since we're going to be working on the main line here to start with, they're going to be automatic. So now you see I have 0 for a grade. I have no other buttons ticked at the moment, and we're going to start laying a little track. Yay! You've been waiting for this. Okay, the first thing that I want to do is I want to say that I'm going to pick a particular kind of track. We're on the track button here, linear objects, which is the little track symbol here. And I'm going to use, in this particular case, PC main track yard. All right. The reason I'm doing that is I think it most closely represents the tracks that I'm familiar with in the area. Next, we get a flyout over here. You see, when I ticked on that PC track, I'm going to right click and make everything go away. But you see here, when I tick main track yard, I get the track flyout menu here, which gives you the specifications of the track. So the track rule we're using is the Penn Coal. We talked about track rule over here, Penn Coal. The type of track is the PC main track yard, which we selected over here in this menu. Now, these two buttons are the passenger train and freight train speeds. This is where the research comes in for what you're going to do for your railroad. You need to know what any particular piece of track that you're going to create, the speed needs to be. So, if I'm doing a main track inside a yard, the speed may not be very high, but it potentially could be, depending on the type of operation that it is. In this particular case, I know that the maximum speed of this track that we're talking about right here is 30 miles an hour. There are no passenger trains in this case, so I'm going to make both of these speed limits the same. There is no passenger train operation in Chattanooga other than at the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to select the track that we're going to use, and in this case I prefer the PC main track yard. It has the appearance that I like for the area that I'm trying to model. So when we click on it here, you're going to see the track flyout menu come out over here, and you'll see that it has the track rule, which again is pin coal. It has the type of track. It has the speeds for passenger and freight. It has the type of line that it is, main line, yard, passenger, and freight, and I will explain what the differences are in that. The line direction, meaning we can go in both directions as we're constructing the track. It's not one direction only track, I guess would be the way to put that. And there's no electrification in Chattanooga. That's what this stands for. Overhead wires, third rail, fourth rail, none of that. Standard ballast, and I don't think we need to worry, we'll leave that off. And super elevation, we'll leave this checkbox unticked. And then this is the unevenness of the track. And I'm going to leave it on 10, which is a good unevenness for mainline track. And it has to do with how the program, as you're running over the track, gives you some undulation to simulate dips and joints in the track that you might feel a bump, that sort of thing. So for a main line in good shape, 10's a pretty good number to go with. If you increase that number a lot, it gets pretty ridiculous. And it becomes more of an irritant than an enhancement of the operation. As we look here, we've got our arrow. Oh, I want to go up and change the speeds. In Chattanooga, there are no passenger trains operating on the main lines, no Amtrak or anything like that. So I'm just going to set this to 30 because the area in which we're operating in, I happen to know, is about 30 miles an hour for a maximum speed for both. If there were a passenger train or a freight train, the speed would be the same. That's where doing your research comes into play. You've got to find timetables, special instructions, whatever you can find about the area that you're trying to model, so you can prototypically model what the the actual railroad is currently operating. So what we're going to do here is we're going to actually start laying some track, and I'm going to swing this arrow around and aim it in that direction. We're just going to practice laying some track. And you'll see that when I tick on it one time, that I've got this line that appears, and it's yellow. Now, it's yellow indicating that it's going to create tangent track. Okay? And when you see the line go gray, it's creating a radius track. Okay? Yellow for tangent, and gray for a radius. Right click, and I'm going to turn it loose again. The thing that I want to say about that is over here in this box, if snap to track is radio button is ticked, you cannot get the tangent track to appear. It only stays gray. So if you ever get in trying to lay the track and you're wondering why can't I get the tangent track to lay, it's probably because the snap to track radio button is ticked over here, and you don't want that when you're trying to lay tangent track. So untick the radio button and you will see that you have the yellow tangent track or straight track in play. Okay. Okay, so let's lay some track. I'm going to tick. I'm actually going to raise myself up a little bit because I like to see from a little higher. And you'll see that as I'm laying this out, in the bottom down here we have the network length is changing the dimension. And that is in meters because the folks that developed this are from Europe. So one thing that you're going to need to do is realize that you're going to need pretty quickly, if you're like me, a good old citizen of the United States who doesn't have a lot of knowledge about the metric system. You may have some general knowledge, but you can't calculate these things in your head. I pull up a Google feet to meters calculator that you can enter the amount in there, and it will tell you what it is in feet if you actually are trying to measure a specific distance related to a profile chart or some other United States measurement that you might have. The metric system measurements will be in feet. Will be in meters, and you need to be able to convert that. So as I look here and I'm running my tangent track out from the starting point in that direction, you will see that it stops at 500. 500 meters is approximately the longest length of track that you will be able to lay in one section. And so when you go then to the end of that section, you'll see that you're still connected, and you can make the yellow line appear. And now I've clicked it again, and we have a section of track that is 1,000 meters long, another 500 meters long. That's a long section of tangent track. And I right-clicked and I pulled the little linear tool off, but I can make it go back just like its magnet. You see it gets attracted over there to it and just snaps right back into place. That happens most of the time. When you start actually running some track through some area with terrain, you may get some terrain over the top of it, and it won't just magnetize directly to that every time. You have to do a little work with the scenery tools to clear the end of the track out so that you can have that which is hovering right on top of the terrain go right into the end of the track and just sort of magnetize and snap in there. You can make a mistake and actually get it in a wrong spot, and if you click on it and do this, you'll see as I add that little piece of track, I've actually added a piece of track that is not really connected, and we've got this little bumping post here that really didn't do what I wanted to do. Let me try again. I'm going to undo that, and I made the mistake of clicking too many times. I have to re-enter my speeds. You see, you just learned a trick. If you right click too many times, you will lose your linear tool. So I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna actually kind of put it off to, I don't know if I can do this or not. If I had a different terrain elevation, I could. See, it keeps trying to build a little switch machine in here, but you can see there's some extra rails there that you don't need, and it's because I didn't have that thing seated in the correct position when I was adjusting the linear tool. So I'm going to undo that, and you'll see it snaps into place. Bonk, and I've got it. So anyway, I could continue on with tangent. Now I'm going to tick a radio button over here, which is the follow network. So if you're doing a really long piece of track, this is kind of a handy button to have. I've ticked the radio button there, and now watch what happens when I do my next 500 meter section of track. And I tick it, and what happens? Woo! I go right to the end. I can do the next 500 meters. Boom! Or if I wanted to do, let's say, 100 meters. You see, I adjust it. And it's kind of hard when you're this far away. You got to almost be right over the top of it and looking right down at it if you want to adjust it down to an exact point. But if I take 100 meters, it'll take me to the end of the network. So that's following the network. You see our starting point is that red point way down the line. I'm going to untick the follow the network button. I'm going to click undo, and I'm going to follow the track back to the beginning. our starting point. So we laid a bunch of tangent track, and now we're taking it up. And we're going back to the point of our start. Let me say this, because we wrote down the number of where we were starting, if you get lost out here and you can't find this tile in the middle of your world, you can just come back and enter the same number that you wrote down for the start of your route. Keep that as a note handy. You can enter that and click the go button, and it will bring you right back here to that location. Because sometimes you get to building something and you get a little carried away and you might lose your way. So we just laid some straight track. Let's tick one of these other buttons over here, or rather let's add 3 tracks. Notice I have 3 linear tools now. Same type of track, same speeds, but I'm going to lay 3 linear tracks adjacent to each other as we go down through here. I'll tick it one time and then look at that. If you're building a corridor like the Northeast Corridor, where you have 4, maybe 5 tracks together, you can lay those tracks at the same time. Rather impressive, right? Can you see 3 different trains cruising down the line? We'll undo and return to the starting point. You could put 20 on there, but that'd be pretty ridiculous. That'd be a pretty good size yard. And I generally wind up making most of my yards. I use a different tool, which I will tell you about another time. I'm trying to think of what else was straight track before I get into talking about curves. Let's take a piece of straight track, and I'm trying to think if I want to tell you about snap to terrain at this point. I'll wait and talk about that when we're doing elevations here. What we want to talk about now are junctions, I think. And we're going to, again, enter the speed of the track that we want. And we're going to turn our little linear tool around so I have it headed in the direction I want it to be headed in. Now, I don't know if you noticed what I did there, but that linear tool did not have a base point until I adjusted it in the direction that I want it to go in. And then it headed in that direction. See, I can turn it a little bit that way, and now the track's headed that way. I can turn it a little bit that way, and now the track will be headed, well, I goofed that, didn't I? I can turn it that way, and then the track's trying to head that way. But anyway, I'm going to line it up with where the start of my route is. So I'm going to lay us a little section of straight. Okay. And then I'm going to come here and we're going to talk about junctions. I'm going to see how that snapped into the middle of the track there. I'm going to click in the middle of the track, and I'm going to drive the track off in this direction, but I'm going to make it turn out to the side. And look what it did. It made a switch. It made a turnout. That's a complete turnout. It's a electric one. And the frogs and the guardrails are in place. I'm going to right click again. There's the machine for the turnout. It is in obviously the wrong place. We'll talk about moving that in just a minute. But you need to always inspect your points when you're creating anything like this and make certain that everything looks correct. Now, this is freehand, but basically you could continue on and run that off into this direction wherever you wanted to. And now you've got a branch or a spur. If you're following Google Earth, you could lay it down right on top of the existing track in Google Earth. Now I'm going to right click and get out of that. Now you notice here is 2 cross ties sticking out and what I would call the switch machine, the electric switch machine, switch operator. we were going to install this, I would come over here and I would tick on that. And there's my little X and Y height adjustment, position adjustment tool. So I'm just going to take this guy and I'm going to drag it out. And prototypically, you'd want to look and see how the railroad that you're modeling lines their electric machines up. It could be on either side based on space constraints. But you move this over and you set it up and align it. Oops, I goofed something. That's what the old undo button is for. And you align it up. I just did it again. Let's try this right here. You can adjust it and align it so that it's near the ends of the points where it should be. And then you can lower it down and make it sort of disappear into the existing cross ties there. And that's where it would be connecting to the points being the point that makes the diverging route. So when the switch machine operates, it will actually throw the switch. I'm gonna jump out of here just for a second and show you how that would work. Let's see if I click drive. Notice it's going to ask me if I want to save the changes. Yes, I do. Okay. Now we've just saved for the first time in this route, that tutorial route that we're creating. But when I hover over the switch machine, look, the little operator handle appears, and if I left click on that, you'll see the points move. If I click it again, they will move back. Okay? So that's how you set up a switch machine that's electric. Now, written into the scripting of this track rule, all the instructions are inside the program to make this all operate. There's nothing that you have to do. It's automatic. Now we're going to hit escape and we're going to go back into the world editor. Alright. Now I don't know whether I can click undo here or not. I've never tried this. Nope, see, it won't let me do it. So now I'm going to manually get rid of all this material, which is a good thing for you to learn. And then we will continue creating. If I wanted to make this a manual junction instead of an electric switch, I would have had to tick this radio box right here. And the next one that I'll make, we'll just go make one. Let's go put a manual junction on here. PC main track yard. I'm picking up my track rule again. Changing the speed. Alright, in this case we want to lower the speed because it's a low speed turnout. We're going to say it's 15 miles an hour. We snap our linear tool into the track and tick it one time, and then we do a turnout. And in this case, you will see that we have the manual switch machine. I would move that manual switch machine over next to the points, just as I did the other one. Get it in a position that's convenient, that clears the train when it's going by, and fits the distance between the switches. Perhaps I need to turn it around. I can do that. And then I can drag it to the other side. You can adjust it. Raise it up a little bit, get those cross ties where they're looking like they should. I'm going to do a little rotation on it. And then I'm going to sink it down just a little bit. There we go. Now I've got a manual switch machine in the ground. It will operate in the same way when we save it and come into the program and actually try to operate the switch machine. And the target changes, and it's really neat. So we'll undo that. We'll take all that out. Bing, 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 bing. And now we're back to where we started. Now let's get rid of all this. I'll tick here and you notice it turns red. I can hit the delete key on the keyboard and goodbye, that piece of track is gone. Similarly, I can do the same thing with the switch. If I just highlight this side, turn it red, hit delete, we lose it. Now here's an important piece. The process of creating and putting that switch in there and then taking it out created a joint that was not there before. Now I've got to weld that back together because you see I've got these two annoying bumping posts in the way. So we go up here into our track tools, or into our toolbox, object toolbox, and we see we have one here that's called weld. And when this works right, you click weld and this little box appears over the top. And if you simply take your cursor over the box and it highlights it and you left click, now those annoying bumping posts are gone, and that is now a contiguous piece of track again. But because it cut it when we did that, now note that it's not one 500-meter long piece of track. It's now two pieces that have been welded together. So I can delete that and I can delete that, and we're back out of it. Okay, so again, all of these things that I'm doing, I'm practiced at doing, and as you try this and experiment with it yourself, you're going to learn how to use all of these tools and learn some tricks and tips that will keep you from being frustrated, because you wonder, what do I do now? Sometimes by trial and error, that's the only way you're going to learn some of this stuff. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up this tutorial at this time, and we'll come back in a third tutorial and talk about curves and radiuses and easements and probably some other things too. I appreciate your patience. I know these tutorials are long, but that's just my style, and we've got lots more good things coming, so please bear with me and hang in there and we'll have some fun. Good day.